Hello everyone, and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. For producers to have successful crops, it's important to know as much as possible about the soil. Today, SUNUP's Dave Deacon talks with our precision nutrient management specialist Brian Arnall about research underway to help producers in the Great Plains grow healthy crops.
One of the great things of working at the university is the science and research that goes into many of the crops. And Brian, there's a lot of research being done into grid samplings. Let's just jump in. What is meant by grid sampling?
So a grid sample is when you take a field and cut it up into smaller squares. So normal soil sample, we would composite a field, which would take 15 to 20 points in a field, put it in a bucket, and take a single sample. A grid soil sample is actually you grid the field into designated areas. It could be on a 1, 2.5, 5, or larger acre grid. And then you take a composite from each of those grids. So it's basically taking a large field where you do a composite and breaking it down into smaller designated zones that are not designated by any soil type. A grid is just that, it's an overlaid grid on top of the field.
What kind of data is being retrieved from that sampling, and how can it be used for producers?
So a grid soil sample is a normal soil test. You're going to get the phosphorus, potassium, all the nutrients that comes with it, information about the soil. With the grid sample though, you can do a variable rate application map. So once you have that grid soil sample, you can do variable rate phosphorus, lime, anything you want. And so that's where producers are using it, is to go, instead of a flat rate, do a variable rate.
You've been doing this for a few years now. What kind of results have you been able to find across Oklahoma?
So what I've been able to do for about the last 4 or 5 years is request data from farmers and producers across Oklahoma and Kansas. And I've gotten in over 500 fields. And we're able to do all kinds of really interesting stuff. Some is just basically looking at how variable are our soils, all the way down to breaking down the economics of variable rate lime and phosphorus, and I've been working on the economists there. Some of the interesting stuff that we've seen over the 467 samples in the last run, statistical run, is that the average pH is about a 6. And this goes from a lot of fields in Oklahoma up throughout Kansas. So the 467 is split in Oklahoma and Kansas. It's about a 6, which is a good soil pH. It's a good target pH. But the average range is just under 2 units, which means the average field in that group of 467 goes from a 5 to a 7. Now, almost a third of the samples have a pH range greater than 3 units, which means you have a pH, even if your average pH, the composite is a 6, which most farmers would be happy with a 6. Right. Your field still goes from a 4.5 at a low to 7.5 at a high. That pH range in itself creates chemical problems for herbicide residual, herbicide breakdown, nutrient residual, nutrient tie-up. A lot of things happen with that kind of range. And so that's the importance of better understanding the variability of your soils. As we compile this data, as we look at it, we can look at it by county, by region, even by soil type. And so this data set's been really fun, and it's all because producers and consultants have been sending me their data.
Say a producer wants to participate in helping you with this. They don't have to have a fancy rig like this with a GPS and a gator.
No, so if a producer just wants to grid sample their fields themselves, there's apps out there, there's ways they can do it, or if they just want to collect the samples, send it into soil testing lab, SWAFL, and get the results, they can sure enough do that. And I would love to have the data. If they've had somebody sample their fields, contact your service provider, or if you have that PDF saved, just send it to me at my email address and I'll include it into the data set. If you're a consultant, I take a lot of data sets from consultants and I compile it and let the consultant see what their producers' averages are. So I give them a small summary of their data sets, and it helps me get in more data and allows me to really expand this, let the economists play with the data set. to look at the crop rotations. You know, is it more valuable in a soybean corn rotation than a straight corn rotation? Look at different aspects of that, crop price and crop rotation.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Brian Arnall, Soil Nutrition Specialist here at Oklahoma State University. And for more information about grid sampling, go to our website, sunup.okstate.edu.
December's that month when I think we want to do some preparation for the upcoming spring calving season. That spring calving season's not that far away, and some of us will have some first calf heifers that may want to calve in late January, early February. Now is a good time to get any colostrum needs taken care of. If we need to find some natural colostrum from one of the few dairies that are left in Oklahoma, this would be a good time to make that contact and make an agreement with that dairy to get some of the very first milk that a dairy cow gives, that milk that can't go into the regular milk supply. It will have that colostrum that contains the immunoglobulins or the antibodies that calf needs to get ingested by the time that he's at least 6 hours of age, and then we'd like to get another dose in him when he's 12 hours of age. The amount of colostrum that's needed is generally about 2 quarts for the first dose that calf receives, and then another 2 quarts 12 hours later to make sure they get an adequate amount of immunoglobulins to give that calf the disease protection that it's going to need in the first few hours of life. If we cannot get natural colostrum, which would be my first choice, then we want to visit a local veterinary supply store and purchase what we call colostrum replacer. Colostrum replacer is an artificial form of colostrum that contains at least 100 grams of immunoglobulin per dose. And that's important, so read the label, make sure it has at least 100 grams of immunoglobulin for each dose. It'll be more expensive than those that have fewer grams, but that's the amount that we need to get into those calves for passive immunity. That calf has an immune system, but it's not yet operative when it's a newborn. It takes several weeks in order for that immune system to get going and supply that calf with his own antibodies. So the only antibodies that he has to protect him against such things as calf diarrhea is what he receives from either mother, if it's a healthy calving where she gives plenty of milk and the calf can get up quickly and nurse quickly. But if you have that difficult birth where that calf is really somewhat compromised, is going to be slow to get to his feet, going to be slow to find the teat and nurse, then that's the one that we want to either feed with a bucket with a nipple on it, or perhaps have to tube feed that calf in order to get the colostrum or the colostrum replacer into that calf in that first 6 hours of life. Keep this in mind as we go through this upcoming spring calving season. I know that it's a little extra work, and in the case of the colostrum replacer, it's extra expense, but we want to save every calf we can because it'll pay dividends next fall when we take those calves to town and market them. We hope to visit with you again next week on SUNUP's Cow-Calf Corner.
2019 is coming to a close, so Derrell, as we're wrapping up 2019, how would you assess the cattle and beef markets?
Well, you know, you can look at it a couple different ways, right? So on the one hand, we've had, continued increases in beef production, and yet we've held prices, on average, relatively stable despite that. So you can look at that fairly positively. On the other hand, certainly the second half of the year has had more challenges than we sort of expected in the first half of the year. So we've had some additional uncertainty. Feed markets are uncertain. Of course, we've had continued uncertainty with a lot of the trade issues and other things. We had a packing plant fire, which caused some disruption in the market for a few weeks. So the second half's been a little bit more of a challenge, but then now, right at the end of the year, we've seen a pretty nice recovery in these markets, and I think we're ending the year on a pretty strong note.
So there was some news recently that Japan recently ratified a bilateral trade agreement with the United States. How's that going to impact beef markets?
Well, this is something we've been looking forward to. If you remember the history here, of course, the U.S. pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership about 2 years ago, and the rest of the countries went on without us. And so the new revised agreement without the U.S. took effect earlier this year, and that put the U.S. at a fairly significant tariff disadvantage. And so this agreement really kind of recovers us back to a more competitive position. We had started to see in the last 2 or 3 months of monthly trade data that we were losing some share in that Japanese market, which is very important. It's our biggest beef export market. And so this hopefully will stop that erosion and get us back to a fairly competitive position relative to that, the rest of those countries in that agreement.
Looking ahead to 2020, how are things setting up for the cattle and beef markets?
Well, again, beef production, first of all, cattle inventories have probably peaked out. We're expecting little to no change. They could even be slightly smaller on January 1. In fact, some people think they will be smaller. I think they'll be minimally smaller, if anything, come January 1. Beef production will probably be slightly higher in 2020 on a year-over-year basis, but minimally so. And so again, as long as beef demand remains strong, then we're talking about a fairly stable environment for the most part as we go forward within the beef industry. There's no real imbalances, if you will, that need to get corrected in the beef industry.
So does that mean higher cattle prices?
Well, I think there's a chance that we see modestly higher prices. Certainly stability is implied here, stable prices with some chance of slightly higher prices. Again, I may be a little less bullish than some other analysts at this point in time, but I do think it's certainly possible that we see some strength as we go forward, assuming nothing really changes relative to the conditions we see today.
So, as one year ends and another's about to begin, we always ask you, what should cattle producers look for or be aware of going into the next year?
Given everything we just said, again, within the beef industry, there's not a lot of factors that are out of line. Obviously, we're keeping an eye on beef demand as we go forward. We're going to have record level meat supplies, so we continue to watch that demand to see if that turns into a bigger issue than it has been. But the biggest factor that can change the trajectory of the beef market in 2020 would be these external environments, the trade agreements, all of the general macroeconomic and global market things. And of course, not to mention probably the biggest wild card next year is the fact that it's a presidential election year. So we really have to keep an eye on the impacts that might have in that bigger environment and what that might change for the beef industry.
All right, thanks, Derrell. Dr. Derrell Peel, Livestock Marketing Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
Welcome to the weekly Mesonet Weather Report. I'm Wes Lee. There's not a lot of rainfall to talk about this week. Over the past 10 days, every Mesonet station received at least a little. However, as this 7-day map from Wednesday shows, the numbers were pretty small, especially in the west. Wheat is starting to look a little better as it continues to recover from a slow start. Most of that slow start being due to cool temperatures. For November, the average monthly temperatures, as shown in this map, were mostly in the mid-40s. If that seems cool to you, you're right. Compared to the Mesonet long-term average, we see that there are 3 to 5 degrees below average across the state. This same low air temperature translated to lower than average soil temperatures. Here you see the same 3 to 5 degree difference and even a 6 degree drop at the Arnall site. The year as a whole has been a cool one so far for Oklahoma. This graph shows the actual average monthly temperatures by month with the blue bars. The orange bars are the expected or long-term average temperatures. In 7 of the 11 months, we were cooler than normal. Now here's Gary showing us some impressive year-to-date rainfall totals.
Thanks, Wes, and good morning, everyone. Well, as usual, we're going to start with the latest drought monitor map, and it's not looking good for western Oklahoma, so let's get right to it. As you can see, we have a large area of western Oklahoma up into north central Oklahoma covered by abnormally dry conditions. That's the yellow. That's an area going into drought if they don't get precipitation. And then the moderate to severe drought, which are the darker colors, from the western panhandle over into northern Harper County in the main body of the state. And then down far southwest Oklahoma, we see a little bit of severe drought surrounded by moderate drought. So those are areas we're going to have to keep watching because they continue to miss out on the rainfall. Now we've talked about the dry, let's talk about the wet. This is the year-to-date rainfall from the Oklahoma Mesonet. Look up in far northeastern Oklahoma. 80 inches at Miami is the wettest calendar year for that city they've ever seen, with 3 weeks left to go even. They beat the previous record by more than 13 inches, which is absolutely shattering that record. Let's check that same time frame out, this time departure from normal rainfall. Miami, Oklahoma, an incredible 37.6 inches of rain above normal. The Western Panhandle, about 5 inches, 3 to 5 inches below normal, so quite a difference in the experiences. The same thing for down in southwest Oklahoma, where they're from 1 to 3 inches below normal. What about coming up for next week? Maybe we'll see a pattern change. These outlooks from the Climate Prediction Center show increased odds of below normal temperatures and above normal precipitation for sometime next week over that general 4 to 6 day period. Now the only problem is that's not a wet time of the year, so above normal precipitation might not be a drought buster. But we can always hope, and we can start to knock some of that drought out of western Oklahoma. That's it for this time. We'll see you next time on the Mesonet Weather Report.
The world's 2019 wheat marketing year harvests are almost complete, and Kim is here to talk about it. Kim, what's the overview?
Well, that harvest, they're finishing up in Argentina and Australia, South Africa, and in the southern hemisphere countries. There'll be a little bit going in January, but if you look at the overall projections now, they're relatively accurate. You look at the world, a record 28.1 billion bushel crop. If you look at foreign the crop, it's near record at 26.2 billion bushels. Now you can bring that back to Oklahoma. We had a below average 1.9 billion bushel crop. The hard red winter wheat harvest was 840 million bushels. You look at Oklahoma, 110 million bushels. Now if you go over to Russia in the Black Sea area, Russia harvested a near record 2.7 billion bushel crop. Ukraine, a record 1.1 billion bushel crop. And if you want to go to a bad place in the world, Australia lost their third crop in the world with only 632 million bushels. Their average is right around 900 million bushels. So a record crop this year. We got lots of wheat.
Let's talk about quality now. How is that looking overall?
Well, I don't have definitive numbers on that, but it looks like it's relatively good. Looks like we got good protein around the world. You look what's happening in the market. Russia, the Black Sea areas are easily meeting that 12.5% protein level. So I think the quality is relatively good this year.
Let's talk about prices now. What is the world's wheat price looking like?
Well, it's hard to come up with a world price because you've got the different classes of wheat, but you can go to the Black Sea, and if you look at futures price using the March contracts, it was $5.96 for Black Sea wheat. KC wheat, hard red winter wheat, March contract, $4.42. A spring wheat contract off Minneapolis, it's $5.16. If you go to Europe, their futures markets for the March contract, and now that's a soft red winter wheat contract, it's $5. Chicago Board of Trade, soft red winter wheat is $5.28. And if you look at our Texas Gulf price, it's $5.40. Now what's the price in Oklahoma? About $4.15. Well, if you look at what's going on right now, it's exceeding those export expectations. Your hard red winter wheat exports are 38% above last year's level. The USDA was projecting them to be up 15%. If you look at all U.S. wheat exports, 9% above last year, projected 1.5%. Soft red winter wheat is 8% above last year, and they're projected to be 22%. So you look at U.S. wheat exports, they've been relatively good. Now Russia, on the other hand, their exports are projected to be down 3.7%. They've been down about 12% on the last estimate I saw. Ukraine, up 25% projected. They've shipped 42% more than last year.
We've talked about this a lot, but if protein levels are relatively low, how are exports above expectations?
Price. Remember, we go back to those prices. Everything was $5 above $5, and our price was $4.15. Our wheat is priced so that it will move on the export market. So rather than sitting in the bin, weighing against future prices, they're getting that out there. Plus, go back to your quality question. I think we've got adequate, our better, more than adequate protein around the world. Therefore, they can take our lower protein wheat, blend it out, and get a good flour milling wheat out of it. And it's price. That's why it's on the export market.
Okay, lots of great information, Kim. Thanks a lot.
We're in the heart of the dormant season, which means wildfires are possible. And John, we're already starting to see some fires pop up around the state.
Yeah, again, this is the time of year, we've had major freezes, all the vegetations went dormant. We're entering the driest time of the year here in Oklahoma. December, January, February are the driest 3 months. We get the least amount of moisture, the least amount of rainfall. We're also in that winter weather pattern where we get a lot of cold fronts coming from the far north that are dry, high winds, and they're also low humidities, dry everything out with, get down a lot of teens, single digit kind of humidities that are, proof positive. It's time, wildfires can happen.
And there's a lot of things that, landowners can do to prevent wildfires. And this is the time of year where we'll start seeing burn bans, but that's not always going to protect, the land from wildfires.
Right. Burn bans are typically put in place to hopefully mitigate common sense in a part, it's just not good conditions to do it. But burn bans do not stop fires. Again, as we've seen here recently, again, high winds cause power lines to drop, snap together, do that. Again, vehicles driving down the road, we've had a lot of wildfires started by chains dragging, bearings going out on wheels, blowouts, a lot of different things. There's all kinds of things that cause it, wildfires to get started. And so we need to be prepared for it, and not everything that we try to do can stop it. It's not going to happen. But like you said, this is the time of year we definitely need to be thinking about what we can do to mitigate wildfire problems and also mitigate any kind of damage to our property and things like that.
Switching gears a little bit, we're in the holiday season, and a lot of people are getting out their Christmas trees and holiday trees, and some people like to use real trees for holiday and Christmas trees. What are some fire safety measures that people can take to make sure a fire event doesn't happen? Yeah,
so if you're going to be using live trees within your house and stuff, again, make sure that you pick a tree beforehand that's not already dried down, that the needles or leaves are starting to fall off of it. Fresher the tree, the better. Make sure you keep adequate water, put that tree in water, and keep adequate water in there to keep it as moist as you can within doing that. Make sure that you're using, UL tested interior lights on that tree. Also keep it away from any kind of open flame sources like candles, things like that. Also keep heaters and stuff back away from them and things like that, just to keep things safe so that you'll have a very Merry Christmas and good holidays.
What about like unplugging and plugging lights? How long should you keep those lights on for?
Typically interior lights, again, like I said, I think when you go to bed, make sure they're off. Don't leave them on all night long, things like that. They're going, again, anymore with a lot of the smaller LED, they're a lot cooler than things like that. So again, the main thing is make sure they're interior design lights that you're putting on those trees so that they'll keep that heat load down.
All right, thanks, John. If you'd like some more information on wildfire preparedness, go to our website, sunup.okstate.edu.
Well, as you can tell by my shaking this morning, winter has arrived here in southern Oklahoma. And with that, it's a good idea to kind of recheck what I would call the winter checklist about our large animals. The number one thing that I get concerned about when it gets cold weather is making sure we have a good quality clean water supply for our animals. Got to make sure that we don't let anything freeze up. We got to keep it open so those cattle and horses or whatever can get a good drink of water. If you have the ability to warm that water up where it's not at the freezing temperature or just above, we know that animals are more likely to consume more water. This becomes pretty important if you have sheep or goats, because those rams and billies and wethers are subject to getting urinary calculi, and so it's really important that they get plenty of water. Horses are another problem. They don't drink enough water. We can have problems with colic, so if you can provide some warm water for those species particularly, you'll probably have less health problems with them. The other thing we have to be concerned about is it takes a lot of energy to stay warm when it gets cold, so we need to look at our feeding. We're probably going to have to provide some extra feed during this time. Last thing I would talk about is shelter. Obviously we can't build barns big enough to house all our cattle, but if we can provide them with a windbreak or maybe an area where there's some trees that they can get into to provide them some protection from the elements, a pasture that's got some tall grass where they can bed down and stay warm, these will all help them as far as being protected from the elements that they encounter. I'd also remind you, don't forget about your small animals too. They need all these requirements and probably some more things for them, for those guys too. Hey, if you'd like some more information about cold weather protection, if you'll go to sunup.okstate.edu, we'll put you some information there.
That'll do it for us this week. Remember, you can find us anytime at sunup.okstate.edu and also follow us on YouTube and social media. I'm Lyndall Stout. Have a great week, everyone, and remember, Oklahoma agriculture starts at sunup.